On a freezing winter night, a pit bull, covered in ice and shivering uncontrollably, scratches at the door of a stranger's home. With nowhere to turn and the temperature dropping fast, her life hangs in the balance. But what happens when the door finally opens will leave you speechless. Get ready for a story of hope, compassion, and the power of second chances. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The wind howled mercilessly through the small suburban neighborhood, carrying with it a biting chill that seemed to pierce through every layer of protection. Snow blanketed the ground, the once quiet streets now deserted under the weight of the relentless storm. For the residents, it was a night to stay indoors, warm and safe. But for one lone soul, the night was a battle for survival. The pit bull trudged weakly through the snow, her body trembling with each step. Her short coat was coated with frost, her paws cracked and bleeding from the icy terrain. She had no idea where she was going, but instinct drove her forward. She sniffed the air desperately, her ribs visible beneath her fragile frame. Hunger gnawed at her insides, and the cold was unbearable. She had been abandoned, left to fend for herself in the deadliest of conditions. Miles away, Sarah Jenkins was wrapping up her day. A school teacher in her early 30s, Sarah lived alone in a cozy house at the edge of town. The storm had kept her indoors, curled up with a book and a steaming cup of tea. Her fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the living room. She had almost drifted off when a faint scratching noise broke through the howling wind outside. At first, she thought it was the storm playing tricks on her, but the sound came again, soft, desperate. Sarah's brow furrowed as she set her book aside and moved toward the front door. The scratching grew louder, accompanied by a faint whimper. She hesitated for a moment, her heart racing. Who or what could be outside on a night like this? When she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. There, on her porch, was a pit bull, her body hunched over, shivering violently. Ice clung to her fur, and her eyes, though tired, pleaded silently for help. Sarah's heart broke at the sight. "Oh, my God," she whispered, kneeling down. The dog didn't move, too weak to resist or even flinch. Sarah reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the dog's icy fur. "You poor thing. What happened to you?" The pit bull let out a soft whine, her eyes fluttering closed, as exhaustion took over. Sarah acted quickly, grabbing a blanket from the couch and wrapping it around the dog's frail body. She carried her inside, her own body shaking under the weight of both the dog and the realization of how close she had been to death. Sarah placed the pit bull near the fireplace, gently rubbing her fur to warm her up. The dog didn't resist, her body limp in Sarah's arms. She poured warm water into a bowl and set it down beside her, coaxing her to drink. The dog lapped weakly at the water, her movements slow and deliberate. "You're going to be okay," Sarah said softly, her voice full of determination. "I'll make sure of it." As the hours passed, the pit bull's trembling began to subside, and her breathing steadied. Sarah watched her closely, her heart aching with every labored breath the dog took. She couldn't understand how anyone could abandon an animal in such a state. The scars on the dog's body told a story of hardship and neglect, but Sarah was determined to rewrite that story. By the time the storm had passed, the first rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the living room. The pit bull opened her eyes slowly, blinking at her surroundings. She lifted her head slightly, her gaze meeting Sarah's. It was a look of gratitude, silent but profound. Sarah smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Welcome home," she said softly. The morning sun peeked through the curtains, illuminating the small living room where the pit bull lay curled up near the fireplace. Her breathing was steady now, and the blanket wrapped around her offered much-needed warmth. Sarah sat nearby, watching over her like a guardian angel. A sense of relief washed over her as she noticed the dog's chest rising and falling rhythmically. But there was still so much to do. "Let's get you checked out," Sarah murmured as she grabbed her phone and dialed the local veterinary clinic. The line rang a few times before a cheerful voice answered. "Dr. Lewis's veterinary clinic. How can I help you?" Sarah quickly explained the situation, her voice tinged with urgency. "I found a pit bull last night during the storm. She's in bad shape, emaciated, frostbite, and she's covered in scars. Can I bring her in?" "Of course," the receptionist replied. "We'll be ready for her. Bring her as soon as you can." Sarah ended the call and turned her attention back to the dog. "Okay, girl. We're going to get you some help." The dog lifted her head slightly, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. It was as if she understood. The drive to the clinic was slow and cautious, the roads still slick with ice from the storm. Sarah had bundled the pit bull in a thick blanket and placed her gently in the passenger seat. The dog remained quiet, her eyes occasionally scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Sarah couldn't help but wonder about her past. Who had abandoned her, and why? When they arrived at the clinic, Dr. Lewis, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, was already waiting at the door. He motioned Sarah inside, his expression softening when he saw the condition of the dog. "Let's get her on the table," he said, leading them into the exam room. Sarah carefully lifted the pit bull, cradling her as if she were made of glass. Once on the table, Dr. Lewis began his examination, his hands gentle but thorough. "She's severely underweight," he noted, his brow furrowing. "Probably hasn't eaten properly in weeks. And these scars, they suggest she's been through some kind of trauma. Dogfights, maybe. It's hard to say for sure." Sarah's heart sank. The idea of this sweet, vulnerable dog being subjected to such cruelty was almost too much to bear. "Can she recover?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Lewis nodded. "She's a fighter. It'll take time and care, but she has a good chance. We'll start with fluids and a proper diet to stabilize her, and she'll need plenty of rest." Over the next hour, the clinic team worked diligently to tend to the pit bull's immediate needs. They cleaned her wounds, checked for infections, and administered IV fluids to rehydrate her. Through it all, the dog remained calm, her trust in Sarah unwavering. It was as if she knew she was finally safe. "You've got yourself a special one here," Dr. Lewis said as he handed Sarah a list of care instructions. "She'll need regular checkups, but for now, just focus on keeping her comfortable and building her strength." Sarah nodded, determination etched across her face. "Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I'll do everything I can for her." That evening, back at home, Sarah set up a cozy corner in the living room with a soft bed, fresh water, and a small bowl of warm food. The pit bull sniffed the food tentatively before taking a few cautious bites. Sarah watched with a smile, tears prickling her eyes. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "You need a name," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "How about Hope? Because that's what you've given me." The pit bull's tail wagged faintly, the first sign of joy Sarah had seen from her. It was as if the name was meant to be. Over the next few days, Hope began to show signs of improvement. Her energy slowly returned, and her once hollow eyes began to shine with life. She followed Sarah around the house, her loyalty and gratitude evident in every step. Sarah found herself talking to Hope constantly, sharing her thoughts and feelings as though the dog could truly understand. "You've been through so much," Sarah said one evening as she brushed Hope's fur. "But you're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." Hope rested her head on Sarah's lap, her eyes closing in contentment. For the first time in what felt like forever, both of them felt at peace. But as the days passed, questions about Hope's past lingered in Sarah's mind. Someone had abandoned her in the freezing cold, leaving her to die. Why? And were they still out there? The thought sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She was determined to protect Hope no matter what. The days that followed were a quiet, healing period for both Sarah and Hope. The pit bull, once a fragile shadow of herself, had begun to show glimpses of her true personality. Though still cautious, her tail wagged more often, and she followed Sarah from room to room, her eyes filled with an unspoken gratitude. Sarah couldn't help but smile each time Hope nudged her hand for attention, or let out a soft bark when she needed to go outside. The small victories, her eating full meals, her first playful stretch on the carpet, or even the way she rested her head on Sarah's lap, felt monumental. Hope was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live again. One crisp morning, Sarah decided it was time for Hope to experience the outside world. The weather had warmed slightly, and the last remnants of snow were melting away. Sarah bundled up and grabbed a leash, her heart fluttering with excitement as she clipped it onto Hope's new collar. "Ready for an adventure?" she asked, her voice cheerful. Hope tilted her head, her ears perking up at the tone. Her tail wagged hesitantly, as if she wasn't entirely sure what an adventure entailed but was willing to trust Sarah. The two stepped outside, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the yard. Hope sniffed the air eagerly, her nose twitching as she explored the unfamiliar scents. It was a slow, tentative walk. Hope still limped slightly from her weakened state, but each step felt like a triumph. As they wandered down the quiet street, Sarah couldn't shake the questions that had been haunting her. Who had left Hope out in the cold? The scars on her body hinted at a dark past, and Sarah's heart ached at the thought of what she must have endured. She resolved to find out the truth, not just for Hope, but for any other dogs who might still be suffering. Their walk ended at the local park, a small, peaceful space surrounded by towering trees. Hope seemed mesmerized by the open grass and the distant sound of birds chirping. Sarah led her to a bench where they sat together, soaking in the tranquility. "You're so much stronger than I'll ever be," Sarah said, running her fingers through Hope's fur. "Whatever you've been through, you're still here. You're still fighting." Hope rested her head on Sarah's lap, her eyes closing in contentment. For a moment, everything felt perfect, but the peace was short-lived. As they made their way back home, Sarah noticed a man standing on the corner of her street. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a worn jacket, and his eyes seemed to linger on Hope a little too long. Sarah's instincts prickled with unease. "Come on, girl," she said softly, quickening her pace. Hope stayed close to her side, her body tense. Sarah glanced back over her shoulder, but the man was gone. Still, the encounter left her shaken. Back at home, Sarah locked the door and drew the curtains, her mind racing. Was it a coincidence, or had the man recognized Hope? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She knelt beside Hope, her hands resting on the dog's sturdy shoulders. "No one's going to hurt you again," she whispered. "I promise." Determined to uncover Hope's past, Sarah began researching dog rescues and local animal control reports. She reached out to the veterinary clinic and a few shelters, asking if they had any information about a pit bull matching Hope's description. The more she learned, the more she realized how widespread the issue of neglect and abuse was, especially for dogs like Hope. One evening, Sarah received a call from a shelter volunteer named Megan. "I think I might have some information," Megan said. "A dog matching your description was reported wandering near a closed-down property about a month ago. The area is known for illegal activity, dogfighting mostly. It's possible she escaped." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Do you think she was involved?" "It's hard to say," Megan replied gently. "But the scars suggest she's been through something terrible. You're doing an amazing thing, giving her a second chance." Sarah hung up, her heart heavy but resolute. She looked at Hope, who was lying on her bed, her head resting on her paws. Despite everything, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a reminder that she had survived. That night, as Sarah sat on the couch with Hope curled up beside her, she made a vow. She wouldn't just protect Hope. She would fight for her. Whoever had abandoned her, whoever had hurt her, they wouldn't get away with it. Hope deserved justice, and Sarah was determined to make sure she got it. The following morning, Sarah woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Hope had already claimed a spot on the rug near the kitchen, her tail wagging faintly as Sarah prepared breakfast. The peaceful rhythm of their mornings was becoming a source of comfort, but Sarah knew the shadows of Hope's past couldn't be ignored. After her conversation with Megan, Sarah had started piecing together the little information she had. The mention of a closed-down property and illegal activity lingered in her mind, and she couldn't help but feel like she was getting closer to the truth. Still, it was a truth she feared. How deep did the pain in Hope's history go, and how far would those responsible go to cover it up? That afternoon, Sarah took Hope back to the vet for a follow-up visit. Dr. Lewis greeted them warmly, his kind eyes softening as he saw how much Hope had improved. "She's come a long way," he said, running a hand over her now shinier coat. "You've done wonders for her." "She's done wonders for me, too," Sarah replied with a small smile. "But I think there's more to her story. I've been looking into where she might have come from." Dr. Lewis nodded, his expression growing serious. "You should be careful, Sarah. If she escaped from something illegal, there might be people who don't want her story getting out." "I know," Sarah admitted, glancing down at Hope. "But I can't just let it go. She deserves justice." On the way home, Sarah noticed a car following her at a distance. It was an old, beat-up sedan with dark-tinted windows. Her pulse quickened as she glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as the car mirrored her turns. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. When she pulled into her driveway, the car slowed but didn't stop, continuing down the street. Still, the encounter left her rattled. She quickly brought Hope inside, locking the doors and double-checking the windows. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it a coincidence? Or was someone watching her? That evening, Sarah sat at her computer, determined to dig deeper. She searched for reports of illegal dogfighting rings in the area, sifting through news articles and community forums. One name kept appearing: an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a known hotspot for illegal activities. It matched Megan's description of the property where Hope had been spotted. Her stomach churned as she clicked through photos of raids and rescues, the images of emaciated dogs with haunted eyes hitting too close to home. She glanced over at Hope, who was now asleep on her bed, her breathing steady and peaceful. The thought of her enduring such horrors made Sarah's resolve even stronger. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She reached out to Megan and shared what she had learned. "I want to visit that property," she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling underneath. "If there's any chance of finding more information about Hope, I have to try." Megan hesitated. "It's risky, Sarah. That place has a bad reputation. But if you're determined, I can come with you." "Thank you," Sarah said, relief washing over her. "I just need to know." They planned the visit carefully, choosing a time when the area would likely be deserted. Megan drove while Sarah sat in the passenger seat, Hope in the back, her head resting on the seat with a curious expression. The drive was tense, both women silent as they approached the abandoned warehouse. The property was eerily quiet, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted fences. The building itself was a crumbling shell, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Sarah's heart pounded as they stepped out of the car, Hope close by her side. She scanned the area, half expecting someone to jump out at any moment. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Broken cages and discarded chains littered the floor, and the faint echoes of past suffering seemed to linger in the silence. Sarah's stomach turned as she noticed scratch marks on the walls, evidence of desperate attempts to escape. "This is horrible," Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't believe anyone would do this." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Hope seemed uneasy. Her ears perked, and her body tense. She sniffed the air, pulling Sarah toward a corner of the room. There, among the debris, was a torn piece of fabric, a frayed collar with a faded tag. Sarah picked it up, her fingers trembling as she read the name engraved on it. Lucky. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she realized the significance. This had been Hope's home, her prison. The name on the tag was a cruel reminder of the life she had endured. Sarah clutched the collar tightly, vowing to ensure that those responsible would face justice. As they left the property, Sarah's determination burned brighter than ever. Hope deserved more than a second chance. She deserved a world where no dog would ever endure the pain she had suffered. And Sarah was ready to fight for that world. The drive back from the warehouse was heavy with silence. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind replaying the scene over and over, the broken cages, the chains, and the haunting scratch marks on the walls. It all painted a grim picture of what Hope, or Lucky, had endured. Beside her, Hope sat quietly, her head resting on Sarah's arm, as if to comfort her. Even after all she had been through, Hope's resilience was unwavering. Megan broke the silence. "We need to report this," she said, her voice firm. "If that place is still being used, there could be other dogs suffering right now." Sarah nodded. "You're right, but we need to do it carefully. Whoever is behind this, they're not going to back down easily." Later that evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, sifting through the evidence she had gathered. The collar, the photos from the warehouse, the scars on Hope's body. It all pointed to one thing. She had been part of a dog fighting ring. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She looked over at Hope, who was lying peacefully on her bed. The scars on her body were a stark reminder of the cruelty she had faced, but they also symbolized her strength. Sarah picked up her phone and called Officer Daniels, a local police officer who had helped with animal cruelty cases in the past. She explained everything: the warehouse, the collar, and Hope's condition. "This is serious, Sarah," Daniels said after a moment. "Dogfighting rings are dangerous, and the people running them will do whatever it takes to protect their operations. But if we can gather enough evidence, we can shut them down." "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. "Photos, videos, anything you have," Daniels replied. "And if you're comfortable, we may need your testimony. Having Hope as a survivor could be key to building our case." The next few days were a blur of activity. Sarah provided Daniels with everything she had, including the torn collar and the footage she had taken at the warehouse. She also worked closely with Megan, who had started reaching out to local animal rescues for more information. It wasn't long before they discovered that the warehouse wasn't the only property connected to the ring. A network of locations across the county had been flagged in anonymous reports, but none had led to arrests. As the investigation gained momentum, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The same beat-up sedan she had seen before was now parked on her street more frequently, its driver always obscured by tinted windows. Hope seemed to sense the tension, too, staying close to Sarah's side at all times. One evening, as Sarah was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hope immediately stood up, her ears perked and her body tense. Sarah peeked through the window and saw a man standing on her porch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a hood pulled over his head. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Just a neighbor," the man replied, his tone casual. "I was wondering if you've seen a dog around here. She went missing a few weeks ago. Name's Lucky." Sarah's blood ran cold. The man knew. Somehow he had found her. She glanced down at Hope, who was now growling softly, her eyes fixed on the door. "I think you have the wrong house," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm. The man chuckled darkly. "You sure about that? Word gets around, you know. People talk." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police." she said firmly. The man didn't respond. Instead, she heard his footsteps retreating down the porch stairs. Sarah waited a few minutes before peeking out the window again. The man was gone, but the sedan was still parked down the street. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The encounter had shaken her to her core. It was clear now that the people behind the dog-fighting ring were aware of her involvement. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of determination. She wouldn't let them intimidate her. Hope deserved justice, and Sarah would do whatever it took to ensure she got it. The next day, Daniels called with an update. "We've secured a warrant for the warehouse," he said. "It's happening tomorrow morning. I wanted to let you know in case you hear anything." Sarah's heart swelled with relief. "Thank you," she said. "Please be careful." Daniels assured her that the team was prepared for any resistance, but Sarah couldn't help but worry. She spent the rest of the day keeping Hope close, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen. As the sun set, she sat on the floor beside Hope's bed, running her fingers through the dog's soft fur. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "we'll face it together." Hope leaned into her touch, her eyes filled with trust. In that moment, Sarah knew that their bond was unbreakable. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The sun rose early the next morning, its golden light cutting through the chill of dawn. Sarah stood by her kitchen window, her stomach tied in knots as she watched Hope sniff curiously at her breakfast. She hadn't eaten much herself, her thoughts consumed by the impending raid. Today could be the day that justice was served, not just for Hope, but for all the dogs who had suffered in silence. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Officer Daniels. "We're moving in," he said. "I'll call you when it's done." "Be careful," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. She hung up and knelt beside Hope, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Hope or herself. Hours passed, each one dragging slower than the last. Sarah busied herself with chores, but her mind kept drifting to the raid. What if something went wrong? What if the people behind the ring escaped? The thought made her chest tighten. Just as she was about to call Daniels for an update, her phone buzzed again. This time his voice was firm but triumphant. "We got them," he said. "The raid was a success. We found evidence tying them to multiple properties, and we rescued over a dozen dogs." Relief flooded Sarah's body, and she sank onto the couch. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more," Daniels added. "We found a ledger. It lists the dogs they've used, names, descriptions, and outcomes. Hope's name was on it. She was scheduled to be put down." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. The thought of Hope's life being reduced to a cold, calculated entry in a ledger made her sick. But she pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the fact that Hope was here, alive and safe. That evening, Daniel stopped by to deliver the details in person. He handed Sarah a folder containing the evidence they had collected. Inside were photos of the dogs rescued during the raid, emaciated, scarred, but alive. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she looked through them, her heart breaking for each one. "We're going to need your testimony," Daniel said gently. "And if you're comfortable, Hope's presence in court could make a powerful impact." Sarah nodded. "We'll be there, whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked closely with the legal team building the case. She shared everything she knew about Hope's story, from the night she found her at the door to the scars that told the tale of her past. Each time she spoke about it, her resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about Hope anymore. It was about every dog who had been exploited, abandoned, or killed. The court date loomed closer, and Sarah found herself growing more anxious. She knew the trial wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to see it through. Hope seemed to sense her nervousness, staying by her side constantly. The bond between them had grown unshakable, built on trust, love, and a shared resilience. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Sarah sat in the courtroom, her hand resting on Hope's head as they waited for the proceedings to begin. The room was packed, the tension palpable. Across the aisle sat the defendants, hard-faced men whose expressions ranged from indifference to hostility. When it was her turn to testify, Sarah stood, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She recounted every detail of Hope's story, her words painting a vivid picture of the horrors the dog had endured. As she spoke, she felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. But she didn't falter. Hope deserved justice, and Sarah was determined to get it for her. When the verdict was finally read, Sarah felt a wave of emotion crash over her. The defendants were found guilty on multiple counts, their sentences ensuring they would never hurt another dog again. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs, but Sarah's focus was on Hope. The pit bull sat calmly beside her, her eyes bright and her tail wagging softly. "You did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." Hope leaned into her, her warmth a reminder of the life they had fought so hard to protect. The trial had been a victory, but Sarah knew their journey wasn't over. There were still dogs out there who needed saving, still stories that needed to be told, and she was ready to fight for them. That evening, back at home, Sarah sat on the porch with Hope by her side. The air was crisp, and the stars sparkled brightly overhead. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a sense of peace. The shadows of Hope's past had finally been lifted, replaced by a future filled with love and possibility. "You've changed my life, you know," Sarah said, scratching behind Hope's ears. "And now we get to help others. Together." Hope rested her head on Sarah's lap, her eyes closing in contentment. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them to this moment, a moment of redemption, healing, and hope. The days following the trial felt like the end of a long and exhausting chapter in Sarah's life, but it also marked the beginning of something profound. Justice had been served, and the men responsible for Hope's suffering were behind bars. For the first time in weeks, Sarah could breathe freely, knowing that no harm would come to Hope or any other dog from those people ever again. Yet as Sarah walked through her quiet home, she realized the journey wasn't over. The fight for animals like Hope didn't end with a single victory. There were countless others who still needed saving, countless dogs who had stories like Hope's, but hadn't yet found their happy endings. Sarah decided that if Hope's story could change one life, it could change many. Hope, now a picture of health and happiness, had become a symbol of resilience in their small community. People who had once avoided pit bulls were now stopping Sarah on her walks to meet Hope, asking for advice about adopting or fostering their own rescues. Neighbors who had initially looked at Hope with suspicion now greeted her with treats and smiles. One such neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down, became one of Hope's biggest admirers. "I never thought I'd like a pit bull," she confessed one afternoon, watching as Hope chased a ball across the yard. "But she's the sweetest thing. I think I was wrong about them." "She's changed so many minds already," Sarah said with a smile, rubbing Hope's head. "She's a reminder that every dog, no matter the breed or their past, deserves love and a chance to start over." A few weeks later, Sarah was approached by a regional animal rescue group inspired by Hope's story. They wanted to feature Hope in a statewide campaign to raise awareness about the plight of abandoned and abused pit bulls. The project would include a video showcasing Hope's transformation, from the night she was found shivering on Sarah's doorstep to her joyful new life. The filming process was both emotional and rewarding. Sarah watched as Hope, now full of life and energy, explored the fields and wagged her tail for the cameras. The production team captured every detail, her scars, her playful demeanor, and the way she stayed close to Sarah's side as if she knew she was safe. When the video was released, it quickly went viral. Messages poured in from across the country. Some people shared their own stories of rescuing dogs, while others expressed how Hope's journey had inspired them to adopt or foster for the first time. One message stood out to Sarah. It was from a woman in another state who had recently adopted a pit bull from a shelter. "Your story gave me the courage to look beyond the scars and see the soul beneath," the woman wrote. "I name my dog Faith because, like Hope, she reminds me to believe in second chances." As the months went by, Sarah and Hope were invited to speak at community events, schools, and even a conference on animal rescue and advocacy. At each event, Sarah shared their story, how a knock on her door on a freezing night had changed both of their lives forever. "Hope isn't just her name," Sarah said during one such speech. "It's what she represents. She reminds us that no matter how much pain we've endured, there's always a chance for healing. And she's taught me that love, patience, and compassion can transform even the darkest situations." At the end of her speeches, Hope would often take center stage, wagging her tail as children and adults alike came up to meet her. Her gentle demeanor and soulful eyes left an impression on everyone she encountered. She had become more than a survivor. She was an ambassador for her breed, a living testament to the power of second chances. One day, Sarah received a call from Officer Daniels, who had led the raid on the dogfighting ring. "I thought you'd want to know," he said. "We've shut down 2 more rings since the trial, and several of the rescued dogs are already finding homes. Hope's story has made a real difference." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she thanked him. Knowing that Hope's journey had sparked change on such a scale filled her with a sense of purpose. She looked over at Hope, who was lounging on her bed, her eyes half closed in contentment. "You've started something bigger than us, girl," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "Because of you, lives are being saved." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Hope sat on the porch, watching the world settle into a peaceful quiet. The stars began to twinkle in the sky, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Hope rested her head on Sarah's lap, her body warm and relaxed. "You've taught me so much," Sarah said softly, "about forgiveness, strength, and the power of love. I didn't rescue you, Hope. You rescued me." Hope wagged her tail, her eyes shining with a quiet understanding. Their bond, forged through trials and triumphs, was unbreakable. Together, they had faced the worst and come out stronger, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope could prevail. Hope's story is a reminder that every dog deserves a second chance, no matter their scars or their past. If her journey inspired you, consider adopting, fostering, or supporting your local rescue organization. Together, we can change lives, just like Hope's. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves animals. Let's spread the message of hope, resilience, and the incredible bond between humans and their furry companions.